We're here. So first and foremost, for our online viewers out there in the wonderful world of YouTube, this is the Global Indian Podcast, home to the greatest conversations and the official platform for people of Indian origin. Because yes, let's face it, we are everywhere. Now, every single week we plunge into the human experience behind our perceptions of identity, take a second look at the countries we now call home, and tackle the big conversations. We continue with our Caribbean tour, going through the islands and re-understanding some of the biggest stories behind the flags. Today, I'm joined by a dear friend of mine and a former guest on the platform. It's my dear friend, Kirk Meighoo, where we're going to be looking at Trinidad and Tobago, looking at the concept of identity on the islands, and more so tackling the big discussions that I think the globe needs to know right now on the island place. But before I continue, let me give you a warm welcome to my guest. Kirk, how's it going on your side of the world?
Good. Nice to be here, Rajan. And so things are going well here. What's it up like there in the UK?
We got our 50 shades of grey skies, so that means it's a great British weather right now. So it's
Yeah, I remember it well.
Welcome to England. So kicking off, we've been friends for quite a while, and you've got a fantastic podcast platform yourself as well. I know we've been on each other's sides quite often. But first question is what's it like to be you? Because not only are you playing a pivotal role in politics and all things in Trinidad and Tobago, but you're obviously born in Canada. So you've got this amazing kaleidoscope behind your perception of identity. So run us through. Let's kick it up on that side of the wonderful world of Kirk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, I was not born in Canada. I was raised in Canada, but I was actually born in the United States. So that adds
wow.
Layer.
Okay. You are the
so
United
for many
Colors
years
of
of my life, I had 3 citizenships. I had 3 passports.
And you didn't even have to pay for one of them. Look at that. You're doing quite well, aren't you?
And you know, the people that it caused me most trouble with was the Americans, of course. And I remember once, and this is when I was living in Jamaica. So this is part of my whole story. It's pretty global. I remember I had to renew my American passport at one time. This is in like 1992, I think, something like that. And I called the American embassy in Jamaica, right? So here I was, a Trinidadian in Jamaica, renewing my American passport, and I had a Canadian passport. So immediately American flags are probably raised and CIA alerted, etc. And the guy was extremely rude to me on the phone, because I can't remember how it came up, but I said, yes, I do have 3 citizenship. I'm a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago by descent. Both my parents are Trinidadians and Tobagonians. I was a Canadian citizen by naturalization because I grew up there, and I was an American citizen by birth. Right? So the guy was so perturbed by it. And he said, so what are you doing, going around the world collecting citizenships? I said, no, right? I said, I just explained it to you. And he goes, well, you can't have so many citizenships. You're going to have to give one of them up. I said, really? He said, yes. I said, okay, well, I guess I'll give up my American citizenship then. He said, what? And I said, yeah, if I have to give one up, that's the one that's least useful to me. My family's in Canada. I live in Trinidad. And really, I was just born in the States. I have no real connection there. And so he was really offended. And I went in to the American embassy. So I was like, how old was I then? I was like 24 at that time. And I went into the American embassy ready to give up my citizenship. And those days I was pretty left wing as well too. Yeah. So I met another guy, right? So it wasn't the guy who was on the phone with me, it was someone else. He said, so you want to give up your American citizenship? I said, yeah, well, I was told I have to give up one, and that's it. He goes, well, what's the reason? So I explained. I said, well, I was told that I can't have 3. And so if I needed to give up one, this is the one I would give up, I guess. He said, you don't sound like you want to give up your citizenship. I said, no, not really. I was told I have to though. And you just close the file. I said, no, you could just go. So anyways, those are one of my many sort of convoluted citizenship stories. But in the end, I had to give up my Canadian citizenship.
You're kidding me.
Because in 2007,
yeah,
I ran for an MP, for a parliamentary seat here in the election. And there was a huge controversy here about dual citizenship and being a parliamentarian.
Yeah.
And this has caused many problems in the past. And it still comes up to this day, even though the issue is settled by law. But here, once you do not swear allegiance, so in other words, you don't acquire a citizenship somewhere else. So if you're born somewhere else, you can't help that.
Yeah.
And that's how you have two citizenships. That's okay. But if you go and acquire American citizenship and a green card or Canadian citizenship or whatever, then you'll have to give it up. So I gave up my Canadian citizenship, and yeah. And so even though my family is in Canada, my mother, well, my brother left, he's in the States now. But my mother's 10 brothers and sisters, all my cousins and stuff who I grew up with are still there. But I'm not
how old were you
planning to go back.
How old were you when you moved to TT?
It basically I was 21. Right? Because it was kind of like a back and forth because I did a work placement here to kind of test it out. I was studying at the University of Toronto, International Development Studies. And that's about development in the third world. And you had to go to a third world country for a year and work. Right? Now, in my whole identity story, I could get into that. But at first, I was kind of like a left-wing Marxist hippie sort of thing. I wanted to go to El Salvador and be with the FMLN. This is in the 1980s for anybody who knows the politics at that time, Sandinistas and whatnot. I was all into that. And then I had a whole sort of revelation, which we can talk about later. And I decided I want to go to Trinidad instead. And, but yeah, so I went for a 1-year work placement and I said, yeah, I have to come back because of a whole bunch of other things. But I was 21, and it was at a time when it was right after an attempted coup here. The only coup led by an Islamic group in the Western Hemisphere. It lasted 6 days and then was defeated. But and that put the country in a state of emergency. We've never experienced something like that before or since. And I came to the country right after that. And in the 2 years preceding that 1990 coup, from about 1988, there was a kind of, a refugee crisis from Trinidad, if you want to put it that way. In fact, it was kind of it was bogus because, but at that time, Fijians had also had a coup in 1987. Yeah, and they rightly claimed refugee status in Canada, because I'm pretty sure your listeners should be aware of what happened in Fiji with that coup there, and there was a similar kind of thing in Trinidad. But it wasn't so. It wasn't. See, when I say a similar thing, there was a breakup of the government. So this is before the coup. The coup was actually quite different from the Fijian. But anyway, people were claiming refugee status in Canada, kind of playing the system. Yeah. Because when investigations were done, they found that no, it's not justified, and so they stopped it. But the point was, people were rushing to go to Canada. And me, as a 21-year-old, just saying, there's no way I'm going to live in Canada. And I went the other way. And my family, my parents saying, you're crazy. What are you doing? Everybody's coming here. We all left and we are coming here. You weren't even born in Trinidad. And why are you going back? Yeah. But I just could not live in Canada anymore.
Well, why did you go back? Because it has such a strong affinity for you. What is it about the country that made you think, actually, I want to go heading back into TT?
Yeah, the story has to do, if I never read Malcolm X, none of this would have happened. Right? Malcolm X is probably the person with the greatest impact on my life ever, right? I got into radical politics at about 16 years old. It was an amazing discovery because I was just into like computers and art and stuff, and I had no idea about anything social or political. I had no care about any of that. But it was actually, my father is Catholic, my mother is Hindu, and I was raised a Catholic. And at Catholic school, the religion department there was into liberation theology. So all of a sudden, I'm learning about El Salvador and nuclear arms race and apartheid in South Africa. And I never, ever knew about any of this stuff. And then my teachers were such an inspiration to me. They used to do vigils and protests, and they were so committed and socially engaged, and it just transformed my life. And so I just became totally into the social activism as a teenager, right? And so then there's another side to this, right? Trying to assimilate in Canada. We were among the first that migrated, right? Yeah. It's totally different now than when I was growing up in Canada in the 70s, right? Yeah. It's not as bad as the UK where you had the National Front, right? So we didn't have, I hope I can say this on air, because Paki bashing as such, yeah. Right? But it wasn't that, but there was a lot of bullying, and that word Paki, used to be used a lot, and it used to, I used to be taunted by it and stuff like that. And my parents just really had no idea what Canada was like or anything. I remember a very funny story of my mother. She tells me when she went up to Canada, and she knew people had to wear gloves. She bought dinner gloves, right? Because she had no idea about the gloves you needed in that kind of winter. And once she saw in the winter, the sun is shining on her, but it's not hot. She just could not wrap her mind around that. And so funny, so those basic things. Imagine what right? So we were, if anybody knows, if any of your viewers know what a Presbyterian family is like, or the Presbyterian culture is like in Trinidad, it's very polite, well brought up, whatever. So they went to Presbyterian schools and all that, and then they had this vision of what Canada was, right? So I was brought up in that kind of way, and they had they couldn't imagine or whatever, like the bullying and the and the crassness, because we were in immigrant working class areas, right? We they had nothing when they went up. So we were in very, that's the kind, and so I kind of had to do a lot of the assimilating sort of from the rest of my, so I was the first to, go to a school and whatever, first to do a lot of these things. I was the eldest cousin, right? So, and kind of like, I kind of had to navigate my way through, Canadiana at the time, for the rest of the siblings that followed. And there's I can get into a whole bunch of stories there, but eventually, let's say by high school time, when I'm talking about getting into liberation theology, I kind of assimilated into a kind of popular clique in the high school I was at, which was white, right? Yeah. And I kind of saw myself as a Canadian, which means implicitly white, right? But I didn't necessarily think of it that way, but that's really what it was. And so, so I thought about these issues in the same way, listeners hopefully will forgive me, as a kind of white hippie, right? So you're going to save the world is full of all these poor people, and we are from these wealthy, rich, privileged countries, and let's go and save these poor natives from all their oppression, right? So I kind of had that same kind of globe-trotting white savior mentality, although I'm far from white, right? But that's the idea I had. And as I started to read more and get more into politics, I started to really be attracted to, the more radical, the better, so like Marxism and anarchism and all sorts of stuff, right? And then I remember this is before the Malcolm X movie and before he was sanitized for the public. This is when he was still a dangerous figure and you couldn't find anything out about him. But I remember I saw there was some protest in the States and I saw a PBS special on TV and somebody holding up a Malcolm X sign, but it didn't say Malcolm X. It just had him with the gun by the window, that famous picture. And I was, oh my God, who is that? Because all you hear is Martin Luther King, nonviolent, blah, blah, blah. And this figure was, who is that? I have to find out who this guy is, because I saw he got everybody scared, right? So I said, that's someone who I have to figure out who that is. And then when I started to read Malcolm X and his speeches, and it just transformed me, because all of a sudden, all these issues were not about me saving other poor people. I realized that I actually was psychologically oppressed and colonized, and that my people were, and that me, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but me being a Christian was part of that, praying to a white God and white angels and worshiping and thinking, and all the ideas of what is beautiful, what is not. I remember, I wanted like a white girlfriend and stuff like that, because there were other races that sort of liked me, but I didn't want to, I kind of dismissed them because I knew my friends wouldn't think they were cool, so you had all these kind of things. I mean, part of it is just being a kid growing up as in trying to fit in, but being a first generation immigrant, I think there's something about first generation immigrants that is really something to study. But but anyway, so all of a sudden I realized that, wow, I have been sort of programmed with, by colonialism in a sense. And then all of a sudden, I just hated everything about Canada. It's like, to me, it's like everything was racist. All the ads were racist. Everything, the history books, everything you read, everything you see, all the people, all the culture. It was like nothing had to do with me and my people and my history and my culture. And I had such a thirst to reconnect with all of that, because really, when I grew up, I was so connected to that. But then trying to assimilate, I pushed it all aside. And so I didn't want to go to El Salvador anymore. I said, I want to go to Trinidad or India. In fact, I had those two. I said, should I go to India or should I go to Trinidad? I figured, let me go to Trinidad. An interesting thing about when I came to Trinidad, a lot of those extreme ideas I had to bin as well, because the reality is quite different than the kind of fantasies you get abroad about life in the third world as well. So anyway, so it's always a series of adjustments to reality.
Now you come to Trinidad though, and it seems to me to be almost polarizing, isn't it, as a country? Because what is identity in Trinidad? What have you discovered for that? Because again, you are the United Nations of this identity world. You got the US side there, you got the Canadian side, obviously Indian side, and you got the Trinidad side. What's it like on island there? Because it's
I mean, and Trinidad is an amazing place. I mean, it's in the sort of geography of colonialism. There are these kind of anthropo nations, right? And sometimes you find this in the geography of civilization, of these kind of places that are in between civilizations. So like, let's say the Levant or the Maghreb, which is kind of between Africa and the Arab world and Europe, and you find these really amazing mixtures. Or even, let's say, even around the kind of Afghan, Pakistan, India, kind of Russia, China area, you have these amazing, in Central Asia, you have these amazing
the Caucasus,
and so similar, so colonialism kind of produced these kind of mixed spaces too, between the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, and then bringing in labor from Africa as slaves, from India as indentures, after slavery was abolished to replace the slaves as bonded labor, which is where my ancestors came from. So we've been 6 generations. So now we are 6 generations in Trinidad. So we've been here a long time. And the culture of Trinidad and Tobago is quite amazing and distinctive, you know, and it is and it is so much who I am, you know. I mean, even though I grew up in Toronto, I tell people I grew up in a Trinidad colony in Toronto. That we actually have Trinidad colonies in New York, in Toronto, in London to a certain extent, Miami, I would say. And the number one way to identify a Trinidad colony is if there's a carnival in that city. So you have Brooklyn Carnival, you have Notting Hill, you have Caravan in Toronto,
Yeah.
you have Miami Carnival, right? Because but now, you know, another thing that's coming to define this Trinidad colony, right? And I say we need a colonial policy in Trinidad, how to deal with our colonies in these places. But is Diwali Nagar, because I mean Trinidad is an incredibly creative place, and we've created, and again, and it was part of our own struggle here to redefine Trinidad identity in Trinidad. Something called the Diwali Nagar that came up in the 1980s, which was really to sort of assert the rightful place of Indian culture within Trinidad and Tobago culture. And so it's, you know, Nagar meaning village. Yeah. So a Diwali village for like a week before. So it's like a kind of like a mela, a fair, you know, like, so for a whole week before Diwali itself. And it really, really, really kind of galvanized, you know, the country in that way. You know, you get like about half the country, you know, in a population of a million, they probably get, you know, 500,000, well, 1.4 million. Let's say a third of the country probably goes to Diwali Nagar when it happens, right? A full 1/3 of the country. That's massive, you know. Yeah, of people coming through and anyway, so this Diwali Nagar is a massive thing where you have music and food and performance and dance, and then you bring in people from all over the world, from the Indian diaspora, not only from India, but from, like, you know, Mauritius or Guadeloupe or South Africa or whatever, and they come to this. So it's a major thing. And now this Diwali Nagar is spreading out to our colonies in Toronto and Miami and New York, New Jersey. I don't know if it's reached London as yet, but yeah, but these are amazing. It's quite an interesting thing.
Is it an officially recognized holiday in Trinidad then by the government?
Oh yeah. Diwali is, yeah. In Suriname and Guyana, Pagua, well, okay, holy, right? We call it Pagua. I think that's probably a Bhojpuri or Bihari term for it. But Pagua is a holiday there as well, but not in Trinidad. But it's a major celebration here, but it's not actually a holiday. Yeah, so I mean, Eid al-Fitr is a holiday here as well, also in Guyana and Suriname. So really in the Southern Caribbean, and we're including Guyana and Suriname, although physically it's part of South America, but culturally and historically, it's really Caribbean, plantation-based slavery, indenture, and so really we are like an Indic space in the Caribbean that, you know, for almost 2 centuries now, of an authentic, rooted Indian civilization here. That's what it is, you know. And I mean, and what's so interesting about it is that it's a pre-partition civilization. So I think a lot of the things that existed in, say, the UP area of India before partition exists here. And has lived, you know, like something like a Hosei festival, which is a Muslim Shiite festival, which is really strange because we hardly have any Shiites. Most of them are Sunni. But then again, it's Hindus who participate in Hindus participated in it quite a bit, and this is very popular up and down the Caribbean, you know. So it's and it probably was like that, I think.
Absolutely, because it
Yeah,
was being almost, in want for a better word, brown was enough. You know, you could
yeah,
celebrate each other's cultures.
yeah.
Because
It's
you're
just
in a,
your
yeah,
regions.
that's it.
This was the festival of your regions and of your neighbors, and everybody participated in it. You know, so we didn't have that that so we didn't we haven't inherited the bitterness of the division of 1948.
Absolutely, absolutely.
47, 48. Yeah.
And you've been able to hold on to that cultural custodianship. And
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
beauty of it. But what's interesting in your side of the world, you're sixth generation deep in. And so that means that Indo-Trinidad community has been there for a lot longer compared to most other cultures that have now come in. Because as you said before, a lot of people were transiting through the Caribbean.
That's
So
right.
then,
I mean,
well, what is
in
authentic Trinidad culture then? Would it be,
well, I mean, what I say, I mean, there isn't one thing you call the
yeah,
Trinidad culture, right? It's a cultural complex,
yeah,
right? And basically, so even like say even the Afro-Trinidadians, for example, okay, at the time of the abolition of slavery, there were 18,000 slaves in Trinidad, which is a small number compared to, let's say, Jamaica, where there's 360,000, right?
yeah,
Or even the smaller islands would have had the same amount as Trinidad. That's because when Britain captured Trinidad in 1797, they had already committed to the gradual abolition of slavery. So they did not turn Trinidad into a classic Caribbean slave plantation. So basically, the Afro-Trinidadian population of today are really descendants of migrants from the 19th century right up to the 20th and 21st, because they still keep coming to Trinidad as free Africans rather than as enslaved Africans. And they would have come, at the same time or later than many of the Indians. And there were 144,000 Indians that
wow.
came to work on the sugar plantations over that period of indenture. So so there's that important sort of statistical perspective on the culture, because what has been unfortunate is that there has been a certain ideology of what Trinidad and Tobago culture is that's been very Afrocentric rather than plural and inclusive, like it actually was before. The existing ruling People's National Party sort of have pushed this sort of more exclusive Trinidadian, and even I would even say it's kind of like an Afro-Christian identity, because they even suppressed African religions, African syncretic religions like the spiritual Baptist, or pure African religion like the Yoruba and Shango and those religions, which are vibrant here. And it is our party, the United National Congress, that has championed the spiritual Baptist, the Shouter Baptist, the Shango, and these these religious practices that were marginalized by colonialism. And unfortunately, the ruling People's National Movement, which came out of the colonial period, still has inherited those colonial prejudices and still has it today. And so that's an interesting fact. But the Trinidad culture is very, very mixed. It's one anthropologist in the 50s identified 13 separate groups, from
Wow.
Chinese to Portuguese to French to English to Hindu, Muslim, Indian Christian, to the French Catholic African, to the Anglican, small church Africans, to Tobago, right? And so although you have all these groups, so you have that on the one hand, but on the other hand, nobody is exclusive.
Yeah.
So and everybody knows and participates in the culture of more than one group. Maybe not all, but definitely more than one. And so you'll find it very common for Muslims to go to a Catholic school
Yeah.
and to, you know, play in a parang band, which is a Spanish Venezuelan Christmas tradition thing we have here. You know, and you know, and maybe have, you know, a Chinese last name or something, because somewhere in the this is,
Absolutely.
yeah, this is very, very, very common here. So it's this kind of blend between you know, having these cultural centers, but then none of them being watertight and exclusive, so that there's a sharing as well. And
But
it
that's
makes,
the beauty of it, though, isn't it? It's this
yeah,
tapestry, this living tapestry that's there, and it continues to blend. But then it all comes down also on the impetus of the government of the day. Do they acknowledge that? Do they bring that together and use that as a sense of communal identity? Or do
yeah,
they recreate the idea of a nationalism that is
yeah,
exclusive to one or the other? Now, one thing that's really interesting about you, Kirk, I remember the first time we spoke, you said you are a third world nationalist.
correct,
I
correct.
was thinking, what on earth are you talking about? Run me through this. And so, but it's something that's really close to your heart, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that is my ideology basically ever since I read Malcolm X, right? That right. He was a third world nationalist, and that's been my ideology ever since. And it and so he was, because he was very much inspired by the Afro-Asian independence movements of the 1950s, right? And the
Yeah.
Bandung Conference in 1955. Right? So that's where third world nationalism is based on. It's anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, and colonialist, and for the self-determination of you know, different nations. But now a country like Trinidad, you know, nationalism has a totally different idea, because Africans aren't native here and Indians aren't native here. I mean, and the Caribs and Arawaks have basically been wiped out, although there are many people who have Carib and Arawak blood in them, which is
Yeah.
an interesting thing that people don't necessarily think about. But probably, who knows? Nobody's measured it, but I wouldn't doubt if it could be 40, 50, 60% have some sort of Carib ancestry somewhere, or Arawak ancestry somewhere. Maybe it could be that high, but it would be a lot. However, that civilization
Yeah.
has gone, you know. But so we have so a Trinidad nationalism, by definition, would have to be polyglot, would have to be plural.
Yeah.
And because you see, we have created an incredibly an incredibly tolerant, plural culture here that has its own dynamic, you know, and you know, and because there is something Trinidadian as well. You know, I've been, you know, to places like, you know, Singapore or Mauritius or Malaysia or whatever, and where and I suppose more out in Asia you would see this, because there's so much more tied to their ancestral cultures, where the groups are kind of separate, and you have this idea of purity. It's
Yeah.
impossible to have purity here in the Caribbean. It's simply impossible. We live in too small a space, and we're always interacting with each other in so many ways, down to the very intimate, to the very public, you know. And so but you know, I would say one of the things that sort of unites Trinidad is a kind of a humorous tolerance, you know. There's a kind of good humoredness
Yeah.
about Trinidadians, and in this way, it's actually quite similar, I think, to India. I think India has this incredible tolerance of like everything. So you can be like a thief and you have a god and a caste, and you can be a kind of you know, like there's hydras, there's, you know, there's all sorts of types of peoples and things, and everybody kind of, there's a tolerance for every type of activity, and it just kind of has its place somewhere, you know. And Trinidad has a similar kind of a, you know, it's like a tolerance for every type of human quirk, you know. And it's just, and this is just a kind of Trinidadian thing, that
Yeah.
we have this tolerance for eccentricity and this tolerance for difference and stuff. But unfortunately, the type of Creole nationalism that's been promoted from the 50s by the PNM, tries to sort of break that down into making a kind of monolithic Trinidad culture that everybody has to fit into, and where it's defined by steel pan and calypso and limbo or whatever, carnival, where that is truly national culture, but but Pagua is not, or Diwali is not, and the UNC in our part here has always been inclusive, that all these things are legitimately Trinidadian, and that's been a sort of long-standing, let's say, culture war that's been here.
But it's
what
a
status do
pivotal
these
thing,
other
though.
things have?
But
Sorry?
it's absolutely pivotal, because the reality is, when somebody were to hold a flag, it has to represent everybody without fear or favor. And you have to recognize that what
Yeah.
now makes Trinidad and Tobago the countries that they are is
That's
its
right.
people,
And
and the people are changing.
that's right. And I think the Ministry of Culture then gets wrapped up in that, because everyone looks, how much money is the Ministry of Culture giving to
One particular,
Diwali,
yeah.
or to Eid, or to Carnival, or to Steel Pan? And it's always overwhelmingly been to the Afro-Creole forms, and by kind of saying that is legitimate and truly Trinidadian,
Yeah.
and so that's always been a kind of underlying theme, and when previously marginalized groups sort of start to object to their colonial era placement in the scheme of things, then others start to think, oh, you're causing division and disruption and etc. When that's not it at all. We're trying to end the marginalization that was inherited from the colonial days, which is being perpetuated still.
That's very, very interesting, because you're saying what you're doing is, what is the point of a revolution if it's not for all? And
That's
saying, by
right.
rising up your voices, you're saying actually it's not just for one particular segment of society, it's for all. You
So
recognize
for
that.
me, that's what Trinidadian nationalism truly is, right? It's something that truly encompasses everybody inside this space.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that people have over a country like Trinidad, for example?
Well, I mean, again, especially as an a Trinidad Indian, I mean, you see that all over. Oh, wow, I didn't know there were Indians in Trinidad, which is so angering, because we're the largest single ethnic group.
And for the longest period of time, for over six generations.
Yeah, and I mean, well, actually, we've been the largest single ethnic group from 1980,
Okay.
but we've been a major group, for generations, and I mean, and Trinidad, like the national dish of Trinidad is doubles and so forth, and known for roti, and Indian culture has defined Trinidad culture so much, and more in fact it's happening, but and so that's always infuriating, to Indo-Trinidadian, because this kind of projection of Trinidad as purely an Afro-Trinidadian space. Now, of course, Afro-Trinidadians have an absolute right. They've contributed and made Trinidad and Tobago what it is, but so have other people.
So it should be equally weighted.
Yes, exactly. So that's really been a frustrating thing, that, and I'm sure white Trinidadians think of that too. Chinese Trinidadians also think that think that. Arab Trinidadians also
So
think that
what
as well.
has to happen then in order for things to change?
Well, I mean, honestly, the ruling party is incorrigible. They will not change it. That is the foundation of who they are, what they think, what they fight for, etc. I mean, it's only when a UNC government gets in power that things become far more inclusive, So
So
and really,
I suppose the $1 million question is the UNC government was in power at one stage, wasn't it?
yeah. I mean, there were
And then
twice.
was inclusivity there during those periods of
Absolutely.
time?
If it wasn't for the UNC government, there would not be even a Shouter Baptist holiday, right? In Trinidad, there, and development throughout the whole country. The UNC, that was a major platform of the United National Congress to be inclusive
Because
of all ethnic
I
groups.
suppose that the thing that's interesting about the UNC government is that the leader of the opposition, former head of state, first woman too, and there's a whole load of different backgrounds. She's actually shattered the glass ceiling in many
In
different
so many
guises.
ways.
And it's actually a very fascinating story in itself because she's done it from what it seems without fear or favor.
Yeah.
Every step that she's taken in. And so now you're almost at that election cycle and a couple of years down. Do you think people are eager for another change to come in? Do you think that is where Trinidad's moving into? Because if you were to read the forums online, again, it is very polarizing on both
Yeah,
ends.
yeah. I mean, to
Do
get
people
away
see
from
her?
the,
I was gonna say, do people see her as being Indian or do they see her as being a woman making a change?
I think in the discourse, I mean, there's multiple discourses there, right? So in the racial discourse, they would emphasize the racial aspect, but our politics, our policy is not based on race and ethnicity. I mean, it's really two different types of philosophies, right? The PNM really inherited the old colonial order of the British, and they just wanted to take over from the British, right? To be the new masters. And so, so they have a very sort of elitist model of development, a very unequal model of development, things that always privilege multinational corporations and the huge conglomerates, things and policies that polarize economically, right? Not only ethnically, but economically. And the United National, I mean, we come out of a struggle actually to unite the Indian and African working classes in the sugar industry and in the oil industry in particular, and led by the great Trinidadian intellectual C.L.R. James in 1965, and then and that has always been our struggle. And so it's been about the working class. It's been about incorporating small independent business owners into the mainstream economy, and not just having them on the side and fringes. It's been about and historically coming out of, because we are the ones that actually come out of our own type of Black Power tradition, our own Black Power tradition. But for us, I mean, one of the big slogans of Black Power was Africans and Indians unite, and it was actually against the PNM, who they felt were, and correctly so, were a neo-colonialist, neo-imperial party with Black faces, but serving the same imperialist agenda. And that's exactly how they have remained to this day. And so we have always been for the small man, for defending civil rights as opposed to privileging the state. That's what the PNM have always been about: control of the state, and the state control of everything, and big business and multinational corporations and all of that stuff. And we've always and our policies have always been for the people and for including everybody. So not only culturally, but economically, so importantly, to economically include everybody, to make everybody part of the economic cycle, instead of being sort of serfs and getting crumbs as the big boys make the money.
So it seems to me, not putting words in your mouth, it's about national prosperity in regards to your vision to say everybody benefits, everybody grows. But how do you do that at a time where COVID's kicked in? That's already created huge divisions where you have a lot of countries right now are just struggling for revenue replacement that's coming in, and multinationals is the ideal way for most countries to attract FDI coming in. How do you change a policy then that has stronger local content hiring, but doesn't necessarily be backed up the liquidity that large multinationals can bring in? What's the balancing range there?
Yeah. I mean, okay. One of the things about Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, we are very creative and innovative people, and that's not only in terms of culture; it's also in terms of economics. I mean, we have so many. Our local small private sector is so innovative that in terms of the local businesses, let's say Caribbean businesses, Trinidadian businesses dominate up and down the Caribbean. In fact, they're pretty resentful of us because if you go into a shop in Antigua or Barbados or Grenada, you're going to see Trinidadian crisps and Trinidadian corn curls and Trinidadian drinks, and it's just going to be full of Trinidadian products,
Yeah.
So we have, I mean, so we're quite dynamic, we're quite dynamic culture, creatively in all spheres, including business, and unleashing it that has been suppressed, and it's just a matter of freeing that up is very important, and so that's one thing. And it's not that we are against multinationals or anything, but there should always be fair partnership and not exploitation, because there has been a lot of exploitation, especially of our oil and gas resources.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of that going on, but we have. But Trinidad, let's take the oil and gas industry. Trinidad and Tobago, arguably, and I would definitely argue in our favor that we have the oldest oil industry in the world.
Yeah.
There's an argument about whether it's the United States or here, but we have a case, and that it is actually
not that you're being biased in any way.
Yeah,
though.
not that I'm being biased, but we have a case. 1857, the first well being dug here, and definitely South Trinidad is, I think, the most drilled oil province in the world, right? It's a long history here. We supplied the British Empire in World War I, when oil was being used for the tanks and stuff like that, and even World War II, we had a very important strategic position in the empire. But I was talking. I was saying that. Okay, so you have all that, and what I mean by Trinidadian engineers, service persons, service companies. We have created we have an amazing skill base now that you will find Trinidadians working in Dubai, in Texas, in all over the world. Because we have developed, Trinidad has an amazing oil and gas skills bank, right? A very skilled population with deep experience, people generations in the industry, knowing all this. My own family has that, so my cousin worked at Petrogen, his father worked there, my uncle worked there. It's you have this thing, it sort of runs in the family. So again, that is kind of the way, that working with multinationals can be beneficial when there's skills transfer, when there's mutual development and not just exploitation. And that certainly is possible. And that doesn't mean we have to have an antagonistic relationship at all, but we have to have a respectful relationship both ways.
And I think
they need their revenues.
And the key word is relationship. I think that's the bottom line of it. Kirk, I could speak to you for the whole day. We've been friends for many a year. And I know that we both have the ability to go on for quite a while, but it's going to be a hard stop on my side, unfortunately. But you are going to come back on the platform, and I look forward to us speaking a lot more further. But Kirk, I really appreciate you taking time. I know that you're incredibly busy. And for many of those who come to the website regularly, you can actually see a lot of Kirk's writing on the Global Indian podcast, as well as the writings on the Global Indian website. I think he did a fantastic long journal on curry chicken, I believe it was called. It was
yes. It's curry goat. It's
curry goat. That was the one.
Curry goat is actually considered like a national dish of Jamaica.
Yeah. Yeah.
It goes to show the Indian impact.
If people want to find out more about the work that you do, Kirk, where can they go to?
I haven't really set up a proper web page because that would be so. I'll need to hire a team to do that. But for my academic papers, you can check academia.edu, and I have a page there. Right now my Facebook page and stuff is full of my work as the public relations officer of the UNC. So not so much my stuff, but my YouTube channel has a lot of
Great
the
content.
interviews and the podcast I did. Unfortunately, my podcast host shut down, so I have to transfer all my audio podcasts to a new host, and I just haven't found time to do it. But the videos of those podcasts are there on my YouTube channel. So check academia.edu, check YouTube.
Done. Kirk, it's a pleasure like always, my man.
Yeah, thanks very much. I've had a good time, and I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful.
Absolutely.